my second selection is Sojourner Truth from 1797 to 1883. That man over there says that women need to be helped into carriages and lifted over ditches and to have the best everywhere. Nobody ever helps me into carriages over mud puddles or gets me any best place. Ain't I a woman? Look at me. Look at my arm. I have plowed, I have planted, and I have gathered into barns, and no man could hear me. And ain't I a woman? Akron Women's Rights Convention, 1851. The woman who called herself Sojourner Truth was born as a slave in upstate New York sometime at the end of the 18th century. She was named Isabella Hardenberg. But her last name was not her own, for slaves were given their masters' names. Her childhood was full of hardship and sorrow. At the time Isabella was born, her mother, Mama Betts, had already had 11 children die or be sold away. Isabella had several masters and last names when she was young, and one of them married her to another slave named Tom, with whom she had at least 5 children. In 1827, New York abolished slavery, and 2 years later, Isabella went to New York City with 2 of her children to seek employment as a domestic. While she was there, she joined a spiritual community for 2 years, and Isabella had been deeply religious since her childhood. Finally, she knew her time had come, and at the age of 46, Isabella renamed herself Sojourner Truth and walked out of New York City on a religious mission. Across Long Island and up to New England, she traveled on foot, preaching, singing, and spreading her message of humanity. Truth joined the anti-slavery community in Massachusetts and met the leading abolitionists of the day. She became a noted speaker at abolitionist and women's rights meetings. Listeners were mesmerized by her commanding presence. She was more than 6 feet tall and deep musical voice. Though she could neither read nor write, Truth had an excellent memory and the gift for putting complex thoughts into clear, everyday language. She had memorized most of the Bible and could quote from it at length. To support herself, she sold copies of the book she had dictated, The Narrative of Sojourner Truth. Her motto was, "I sell the shadow to support the substance." When the Civil War erupted, Truth continued to speak out against slavery and went to Washington, D.C., where she met Abraham Lincoln. So she worked with the National Freedmen's Relief Association to help ex-slaves find employment and place to live. So after the war, she lobbied for their migration to the Midwest. And by the end of her life, Sojourner Truth had become a legend. She died at age 86 at her home in Battle Creek, Michigan, surrounded by her surviving children and grandchildren. More than 1,000 people attended her funeral. Women in slavery. Slavery is as old as civilization itself. Slaves built the Egyptian pyramids and the Hanging Gardens of Babylon and the Aztec cities and the Great Wall of China. Most slaves throughout history have not been male, however, but female. This is because most males captured in war were killed, and women and female children were kept to be exploited for sexual pleasure and their reproductive capacity as well as for labor. Because female slaves, especially girls, are the lowest members of the social hierarchy, they have the least power. Like male slaves, females have no claim to their own children who belong to their owners. But unlike males, females are often at the sexual disposal of their owners or overseers as well as slave maids to whom they are rarely legally married. African slavery in the Americas began in the 16th century when ships first brought African slaves to the Caribbean. It disappeared officially with its abolition in Brazil in 1888. Chattel slavery in Africa has lasted longer, however. From the 16th to the 19th century, at least 2 out of every 3 slaves in sub-Saharan Africa were women and females. fetched a much higher price in the internal slave market than men did. So scholars have suggested that in Africa, women slaves were more desirable than men because it was perceived that they worked harder. Although slavery in Africa was often less harsh than in America because slaves in Africa had a greater chance to assimilate. Slaves usually lost their own families and cultures. So for economic reasons, it has been proved very difficult to eradicate slavery in some parts of Africa. But the last country to abolish slavery was Mauritania in 1980. But human rights groups report that as many as 90,000 slaves remain in Mauritania and the Sudan, and the majority of them are women and children. Thank you.